This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome. My name is Jacob van Steldunen, and I'm a business manager here at SignAgent. I'm excited to kick things off by introducing some of today's great presenters. So we'll start with Kelly Moorhead, Design Director from Envision. Kelly is an experienced brand strategist with a demonstrated history of working in the hospitality and healthcare industries. She is skilled in brand conception, signage and wayfinding, brand environments, project management, and stakeholder engagement. Kelly is a strong and experienced design professional with a bachelor's degree focused in graphic design from Pennsylvania State University.
And this is David Juritzma. The reason we came up with this webinar was we had actually, or Kelly had come to us asking us for some particular help in a project that we're going to be featuring on this. So Kelly's going to talk about some of the issues, some of the obstacles, and how we were able to overcome those. So that was sort of the reason for this webinar to begin with.
Yes, thank you, Kelly. Now on to Jeff Uzbalis, a wide format application specialist of 3M Canada, a seasoned technical sales professional with over 30 years experience. Jeff is a wide format graphics industry expert who is service oriented with a strong technical skill set and customer focus. For the past 15 years, Jeff's focus has been on supporting designers and architects, brand owners, and sign shops. As a subject matter expert on graphic applications, Jeff conducts training workshops and webinars and speaks at industry events across Canada.
All right, and David again here. And yeah, throughout the setting up of this webinar, Jeff sort of reached out to me and said, "Hey, Dave, you know, this has been my life for the past 6 months," and started talking about things that are often overlooked, such as quality, and you know, all those pitfalls that could happen. That sometimes if you rush a project, you can have some pretty severe consequences. And so I got him to, I asked if he would come on board, and he gladly accepted. So Jeff will be speaking after Kelly regarding those types of quality issues.
Yes, thanks, Jeff. And third, we'll have David Juritzma, president of SignAgent Inc. David experienced the pains of signage programming the old way until he designed and developed his own solution. And now SignAgent is trusted by hundreds of the world's top wayfinding design firms and gives sign designers, sign managers, and sign fabricators complete control of their projects through their entire life cycle.
And I guess I'm talking about myself now, but I'm going to be going through and some of the issues that we saw that when we were working with Kelly on the project, we had implemented some new features into SignAgent. So I'll be talking about those features and giving a quick update to show you guys how you can implement those in your projects. So without further ado, Kelly, you can start your talk, and I think Jacob will give you control of the screen.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, so hi everyone. I just wanted, well, I've been introduced, but I also wanted to introduce Inji Kim, who really was the backbone of this project. We had an existing client who wanted to be proactive about their back to work programming, so they asked us to help. We knew coming out of the gate it was going to be a very tight turnaround, and then we lost a couple weeks, which made it an even tighter turnaround, just because it took them a while to get us floor plans and things like that. And NG really drove this, was all over quality control, and worked incredibly hard. So I just want to do a shout out to NG. We did realize we were in a really big time crunch when we finally got the floor plans. So we actually reached out to David and his team asking if they knew of anyone who could help us who already used SignAgent, because we didn't have time to sort of get anyone up to speed. And they actually said, well, we can help you guys. So we were like, great, they know SignAgent better than we do. So we had a little orientation meeting, which in itself was really helpful. They showed us a couple little tips and tricks that they've developed, and that made the whole process go faster for us. So I do want to give a shout out to SignAgent and say they're always very responsive to us when we have questions or little glitches, but that especially helping us with the work was really a great surprise and very helpful. So thank you guys. So we had a client who really wanted to get going on the post-COVID return to workspace. So the first thing we did was we developed a series of signs that they would use in all their floors. And it was fairly easy to put together. There was a lot of information on the internet already about protocols and that kind of thing. So the package was fairly easy to put together. What did become more tricky is they're a national company, and we had English only, we had French only, we had English and French equal, and we had English and double-sized French. So there was sort of a lot of moving pieces we had to be very careful about depending on what geographical zone we were working in. So we just thought about the sort of the journey of the user coming back to work and what would be sort of the messaging they would need. Just some general rules for people to follow. We did a lot, I'll get to it a bit later, but we did a lot of circulation planning to route people one way through offices. It was not always possible because there was sort of a lot of like dead end hallways where the washrooms were, where there was just no way to not have people pass one another. But we were very clear about entrances, exits, that kind of thing. We did take some of the signs from government issued things, which was helpful. We knew some were Ontario issued, we had some Quebec issued ones, and then we had some overall federal Canadian ones. And then with the bank, we worked with them sort of blocking off every other seat on their location plans so that people were spaced out when they came back to work. And in part of our layout, we would look at a typical boardroom, and if it typically sat 8 people, we would make it a boardroom for 4, just to keep people spread out. So a lot of these numbers we figured out from the floor plans. And in the end, we also helped them print a bunch of blanks so that they could make some decisions on the fly. I should mention the bank had all their managers install all of this. So we did send pick and pack kits that had all the signs, a squeegee and a tape measure, so that we were trying to equip them to do this as well as they could on their own. And then these were the floor decals. And we'll get more into this later when we get into the 3M materials, but we know there's a big difference between vinyl that goes on, say, a terrazzo or tile floor and vinyl that goes on carpet. But of all the floor plans we got, there was no indication of where was carpet and where was tile. So we just did it by percentage. We just took a guess, and we haven't heard that we're that far off. So I think we did 65% carpet and 45% tile. Yeah, and then this is just messaging at everyone's desk. General elevator messaging. These are some products that we were also offering the bank. And then this is what our typical location plan looked like. So we put together a circulation plan as best we could. We marked off the desks where people should sit and where they shouldn't. And again, routing people one way from the elevator, and a lot of people I think have to walk a lot further to stay on this one-way routing, but that's the new normal, I think. Then we would bring it into SignAgent, and we would start placing the signs. And can everyone see the signs over to the right? I've got all my GoToMeeting stuff is sort of hiding it on my screen. Is it hiding it for everyone?
Yeah, no, that can be, we can see that.
Okay, so because there are quite a lot of signs, we broke it out into different types of signs. So there were 2 or 3 different floor plans on each one, showing them where to mount the signs. Yeah, and so that was our typical specification package. Some of the things I wanted to talk about, I'm gonna go back to a prettier picture. Some of the ways that we some learnings and some things that we realized was it was a very tight turnaround for us to do the design and to produce all the signage. So we did an initial 5 floors, and from that we sort of took an average of how many signs of each type were on each floor, and we went ahead and produced that sort of inventory of signs. And as we went through, we were keeping very close track of our inventory to see when we had to print sort of another 250 or 500. We worked in conjunction with our PM team, and they were more in charge of that. But with the, maybe I can go to my, a big part, as I've mentioned, a big part of this is organization. And I just, where did I put it? There. So NG was master of this master document. So this was a sort of what, there was a floor number, when it was due, who was doing the circulation, if it was ready, if it had been uploaded into SignAgent, who was plotting the signs, who reviewed it, who was packaging it in a presentation, when it was completed. And then through SignAgent, it was easiest for us to pull each of the sign quantities so we could keep a master tally of how many we were going through. And then also through that, it was easy to provide a pick and pack document that it was just easy to pick the exact number of signs you needed, put it in a box with the tape measure and the squeegee, and put a label on it so it could be shipped to the correct location. And another really big advantage we had in using SignAgent is, as I said, the timing was really tight. So there were 4 or 5 of us often working on it at the same time. And we really took advantage in SignAgent of the status or the states. So someone would be working in working state, and then they would drop it into review state and that kind of thing. So a lot of us could be in and out of the same drawings really quickly and move them through the whole sort of progression until they were complete. So we hadn't really worked like that before. But that, because there were so many of us working on it, it really worked quite well. Yeah, and then, yeah, and so then that is basically what we did. We got it done in, I think, under over 100 floors in under 2 weeks, which was a lot, because there's some of the decals alone, the floors were quite full of signs. So it just, it was a big effort, but it paid off. The client's really happy, and it was a good project to work on. Does anyone have any questions?
Feel free to enter your questions in the chat, either now or anytime maybe at the end of the webinar. I can also bring them to you, Kelly, if there are some. For now, let's go over to Jeff, and I am going to make Jeff the presenter now. Okay, so you should have the ability to share your screen.
Okay, yeah, I see that now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kelly. And then yeah, we'll try and field questions near the end if there's others, because I think they're gonna sort of all collide. I made some notes that I'm gonna try and improv over some of the stuff that you talked about. You know, actually using the SignAgent stuff. So.
Okay, great.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, David. I appreciate you inviting me to participate. My name is Jeff Uzbalis. I'm with 3M Commercial Graphics. Been with the division and the company for 23 years. And like David said, this has been my life for the last 5.5 months or so. The last week of March, we started to see demand ramp up for floor graphics, and the materials that we supply are in rolls as a raw material, and we were selling them by the 10s and the 30s, and at some point in April we were selling them by the 100s, and in May I think we had chewed through all the Canadian inventory, and we began drawing on the US inventory, and by June we had exhausted that, and luckily we had a demand plan in place at the factory, and we were able to ramp up production. But the other business kind of went flat, and then all the wayfinding and floor graphics business sort of filled the gap. So it's been a challenging and exciting period. But what I end up doing is talking a lot about the nitty-gritty practical considerations, or troubleshooting. And so that's the kind of stuff I'm just going to share with you today to really to help you manage, prepare, be successful, and have happy customers and clients, and avoid some of the common pitfalls. So I'm not sure if that's showing correctly.
Yeah, I think it's the same issue that we were having when we talked last, that it's cropping out. Yeah, so maybe just, yeah.
That's better. So there's not all films and graphics are created equal. At the manufacturing process, they can be made either as cast films, which are the best. They simply don't shrink by their nature. But for shorter term applications, typically a calendared film is used. And within the calendared category, you can have different grades as well. So the quality of ingredients and the manufacturing method can have an impact that can result in happy customers or dissatisfied clients. So monomeric is typically a lower cost, lower grade option, but it simply doesn't have the characteristics to stand up. So within days and weeks, we started to see failure out in the marketplace. The other issue that, for me, safety is #1 priority. We need to make sure these graphics are safe for people to walk on, and behind that is avoiding liability. So the UL 410 slip resistance rating is important. That's the North American rating. There are products out there that don't have that, or they have some other rating from other parts of the world. So just a caution there that you really should be looking for things that have that UL 410 to avoid any safety issues or liability. Same thing happened with another client. This was a large national outfit, and they used a monomeric product, and on paper it looked cheaper, but when you have to do it again the second time, it's definitely not cheaper. So again, it wasn't just the what, but the how. We did a lot of work with this client to make sure that their people understood the right way to do the installation. Like Kelly was saying, you ship a kit, and either a manager or the last person hired has to do the install. So we came up with a video and a very brief synopsis or summary on how to install, because the technical document was 19 pages long, and it's just not practical to expect people to read and understand that, especially when they're under the gun. So we developed some training that was basically a video. So we didn't have any language barriers. They could just watch it and follow. The UL 410 slip resistance, this is like, as I say, the critical safety aspect. And what it is, it's a measurement, a test they do to measure the coefficient of friction. And you either pass or fail. So you submit your materials, Underwriters Lab does the testing, and then they give you the report and you get a certificate. So I'm fortunate to work for a company that has successfully passed through that testing, and we have a number of options available depending on the type of application, long-term, short-term, indoor, outdoor. So we've got a safe, reliable product that way. These are some notes about best practices. I mean, your vendor should know this, but again, sometimes they don't, and it's important to vet your vendor, but these are the kind of things that we recommend. A butted seam, so edge-to-edge seam if it's a larger graphic, no overlaps. You don't want to create a tripping hazard. You don't want sort of a starburst. You want things that are round or oval or square and rectangular, and the corners shouldn't be 90 degrees. That's a vulnerable tip. So we would recommend some kind of a radius on those corners. Location is important as well. A lot of people like to put the graphic right at almost like an entrance mat. There's a lot of water, rain, snow, salt that gets dragged in. So it's really best to avoid that. Have matting and then the graphic. That will extend the life of your graphics. For longer term applications, it's actually recommended to wax over. You effectively encapsulate the graphic, and then your normal floor maintenance practices can continue, and the graphic is effectively encapsulated under that layer of wax. That's for, for a long-term project. I think initially everybody thought this was going to be a short-term scenario, weeks, maybe a month or two. Now we're coming to the realization that these wayfinding graphics need to be in place for quite some time, and so this is becoming more important. Again, the importance of location. Another pro tip that we found over the years is to actually, if the graphic is supposed to be, 24 inches, make it 26 inches, just bleed off the edges. That way, if you do get any wear and tear along the edge, rather than having to, replace, reprint, replace, and reinstall, the vendor can simply come along and trim it back to a good edge. And that keeps the client happy, minimizes cost, and keeps the graphic looking good. Carpeting. So we've been selling graphics for carpets for some time now, about 10 years, but they were typically used for special events in hotels or convention centers and things like that, and they were generally large. Now with the COVID situation, the wayfinding graphics, they tend to be actually smaller. They're 9 inches, 12 inches, maybe they're narrow arrows. And by its nature, carpet is more difficult to adhere to. It's a fibrous material. It's not as easy to stick to as a smooth terrazzo floor, for example. And so we're finding that we're being successful with carpet graphics, but there have been some instances where people have ignored all those best practices that I spoke of earlier, and we have narrow pointed arrows that are very vulnerable, or sometimes the carpets are thicker than what you would expect. Generally, if it's an industrial grade low pile, we're in good shape, but there is some variation there. So we found in some instances we've had to adjust from the standard recommended film to go to a stronger adhesive, or one that actually has an adhesive that's specialized for what we call a low surface energy material, LSE. And that's because some carpets actually, especially if they're new, they actually have like a stain resistance treatment to them, and that effectively makes them low surface energy. We've done a lot of applications with large organizations, and it's like we get one come back. We'll do hundreds and hundreds, and there'll be one location perhaps where there's been an issue, and we find out that, oh yeah, they replaced the carpet, in December or November of last year, or maybe in January and February of this year, whereas the other locations, the carpet had been in place for some time. So again, some specific best practices with carpets. The larger the graphic, the better. Avoid 90-degree corners or narrow, pointy arrow type things. Moisture is the enemy of good adhesion, so the carpet has to be dry at the time of application. Again, using doormats can help. The carpet should be thoroughly cleaned, thoroughly vacuumed, and it's a good idea to test. Don't just assume everything's going to work. So if you can tease out a detail, if the customer says, "Oh yeah, by the way, we just moved in, it's a new location," we might have to look at doing something different for that specific location if that carpet has some kind of stain treatment. But generally, we've been very successful. So that's interiors. Taking it outside, once you move outside, you typically have a porous and rough surface, either concrete or asphalt or granite pavers or some kind of block. So for that, again, safety is paramount. We need a safe, durable laminate that has a very rough texture to match the surrounding surface. And we also need to make sure that we've got an adhesive that will bond to that unsealed, porous and rough surface. So normally nothing works, but again, there's 20 years ago, 3M developed a modified adhesive. It's a double layer, effectively a thicker layer of adhesive, and it's a softer adhesive that will actually fill and flow into all those little nooks and crannies. And we've had a very successful run with sidewalk graphics. Every year it seems somebody comes out with something that they claim is better and cheaper, and this is an example of failure that we see. So there is, you get what you pay for in this business, I find. So we do have a proven durable solution for exterior. And it is critical because if it gets wet, you need that coefficient of slip resistance under wet conditions. And the textured laminate for outdoor sidewalk graphics has that. Other materials don't necessarily have that, and we don't want anybody in an unsafe environment. This was an example that was done out west early on. I think it was the municipality of Burnaby. They put the graphics down, and we're happy to report that more than 3 months later, things are still in good shape. So, we can bridge across the joints and provide a safe graphic. So moving back inside, the other thing that we're hearing from facilities, people, landlords, property owners, clients is standing up to cleaning. So there's some different ideas out there about what is required, and we have been told that simple detergent and water or soap and water or a high concentration of isopropyl alcohol and water is effective as a cleaning regimen. And I'm happy to say that the laminates that are used for signage and graphics and wayfinding that we've been using for many years now, they've been used in healthcare and hospital settings. They do stand up to that type of cleaning. So whether it's just detergent and water or isopropyl alcohol and water, they will stand up to that. We do have case studies available if anybody needs that. If you have a client that wants a higher sense of safety, I guess, we do have some products in the Dynoc line, and they have specifically been tested against the hospital cleaning regimens. So there's a couple of pages of documentation where they list these third-party cleaning chemicals by name, and they've been found to successfully stand up to that kind of hospital cleaning regimen, let's call it. And again, case studies are available. Pardon me. The other thing we run into, I mentioned before, LSE or low surface energy, and just to define that, it's basically things such as powder coated metals and certain plastics, not all, but certain plastics, as well as some coatings and treatments. They have what we call low surface energy. And the way you can think of it is if you wash your car, if you have a dirty car, the water sort of wets out because it's a high surface energy and it overcomes the surface tension and the water spreads out, versus if you've just washed and waxed your car, it's a low surface energy coating, and now the surface tension of the water is stronger than that force, and you get beads or droplets. So to overcome that situation, we've had to develop specialized adhesives that will bond to those low surface energy type surfaces. And it's important to understand the application. Is it short-term or long-term? Because sometimes, you may have something that you want to remove it easily, and the specialized adhesive will actually bond it permanently. So we don't always use a LSE adhesive on an LSE surface if the graphic is meant to be removed in a short time. We would use a standard one with a strong adhesive, and it'll act like a low tack. But if it is meant to go on and stay on, perhaps as a permanent sign, then we would want to use that low surface energy type adhesive. So this is an example in the bottom left there. It's a powder coated metal kiosk, and standard film was used with the standard adhesive, and it just didn't bond properly, and within days it was lifting and peeling. Versus the project to the right, we were brought in, we did testing prior to making the film selection, and we determined that it was indeed a low surface energy powder coated metal. We we tested, and we were able to choose the right product. The print went forward, installation went forward, and we have a happy client with a long-term graphic. The other surface type that we run into a lot is textured surfaces: brick, block, concrete, granite, aggregate, and these can be inside or outside of the facilities. And so typically nothing will stick to these things, much like a sidewalk or asphalt. But again, we've been able to develop the product. And if you remember the championship run of the Raptors last year, then you may have seen this on Queen Street. That product was used for that.
And the championship run this year too.
Yeah. So if you don't use the right solution, these are the results. So sometimes people think, well, whatever, I'll just use a high tack, but it's a system really. And these are the disappointing results sometimes that can occur. So we've developed a solution that really is a system. It's got multiple parts. So it's the film, the adhesive, the tools to get the job done, the actual technique of using those tools, and a high heat methodology. If you take any one of those things out, you're going to have failure. But if you follow the recommendations, we've had nothing but success for many years now on a wide range of textured surfaces. And it's quite important, because when you think about it now, sometimes the first encounter that the public and the employees are going to have in the workplace, it's not the beautiful atrium or entrance, it's the parking structure, which is concrete block walls, concrete walls, things like that. And so more and more wayfinding and branding and information is being conveyed in these parking structures or in sort of utility corridors where it's a block wall, painted or unpainted. We need to use these products. And we've got both standard and reflective versions that can make that possible. And we can put different finishes on there, whether it's indoor or outdoor. The other aspect is painted walls. And surprisingly, this is probably the most challenging thing we have to deal with in our business and in the industry. I think because most people, they just think that it's pretty simple. How hard can it be to put something up on a painted drywall? In the last 5 years or so, there's been a complete adoption of low VOC or no VOC paints in the paint industry. And by their nature, they are low surface energy and difficult to adhere to. And it's worse if they're colored. If they're white, it's less of an issue, but if they're, like this medium pale blue, you can see graphics are literally lifting and falling and have fallen off. They're lying on the carpet because we don't get a good adhesion. Again, this problem can be avoided with proper site inspections and adhesion testing, and then choosing the right product based on that. But if people just assume it's a no-brainer, you end up with an upset client and costly redos. This one was done twice before they made the call, and we were able to help them out. So we don't just hope and pray. We actually have a kit that the 3M lab created so that we could do adhesion testing. A lot of people will just put a piece of film down and then lift it right up, and that's not a valid test. Or they'll touch it with their fingertips and say, well, that doesn't feel very sticky, or, oh, that feels very sticky. Completely invalid testing. So the lab came up with a process using 1-inch wide strips of material, and it's a kit that's got everything you need. There's rolls of various film types. There's scissors, so you can cut them to length. You fold over a tab, you hole punch it, you lay it down according to the recommendations with a rivet brush. You wait 15 minutes, and then you pull it with the spring scale. And that gives us a reading, and that gives us an idea of what type of surface we're dealing with. And it's important because we really only know 5 things. I always get asked, hey, what have you got for stairs, or what have you got for a table or a chair or whatever the item is? And I don't know until I test, because we really only know basically aluminum sign blanks, acrylic or acrosteel, uncoated glass, and then original equipment, trucks and trailers, as well as cars, vans, and pickups. That's it. For that stuff, we can say, hey, use this or that. Everything else is test and approve. So what does that mean? That means we test. That means we test in a professional manner, following the lab recommendations, and we're able to make a decision that's grounded in science and based on data. And those paint considerations, again, are incredibly important these days. So the low VOC paints, they're basically like non-stick pans in some instances, and we have to bump it up 1 or 2 levels to get adhesion. So we always need to test, and that's something that we can work with our, the sign vendors, or the sign vendors themselves can have this kit and they can do the testing. I often do it on behalf of clients myself. If they don't have a kit, we can walk them through it. They could just, strip off, make a 1-inch strip and conduct the test themselves. But it's critical to test. So generally, low VOC and no VOC paints can have lower adhesion rates, and it's honestly, dark colors are the worst. I was on site where it was a bright, a dark red, tomato red kind of wall, a feature wall. And we had to go up to the highest TAC LSE type adhesion in order to stick to that. Whereas the other walls, we could use a standard film. So it does matter. Matte finishes are also most prevalent for paints, and those are also a little more challenging. Then the other issue is paint curing. In some instances, it could be a renovation or a new construction. The trades are all coming in at different times, and then there's a rush, and painting's done on Wednesday. They want the graphics installed on Thursday because they're handing over the keys on Friday. That's a recipe for failure and redo. Paint really has to be cured, not just dry to the touch, but actually fully cured. That means 7 days minimum at room temperature. So if the HVAC hasn't been turned on in the winter and it's only 10 or 12 degrees, you're not going to have enough time in 7 days. That paint will still be uncured. This time of year, it's not as big a deal, but it has to be fully cured. And then the third thing is proper installation technique. The lab spent a lot of time figuring out how to overcome all these problems with low and no VOC paints. And what we found was a simple IPA wipe would change the characteristics of that wall and give us better adhesion. So it's important, though, that that gets factored into the project and into the quote, and then it has to be supervised, because I've seen instances where everybody goes, did you clean the wall? And they're like, yeah. Well, they didn't. So somebody's got to make sure that that's built in to the project and that actually gets done. It is a critical application step. When I'm doing specifications now, I don't just specify which product to use for a particular application. I'm now specifying how it should be done. And the aim is to do it right the first time. And then I'll also mention cold weather installs. It's August now, but there are projects that we start talking about now, and they're not going to happen until December or January or February. And as we move through the year, there are applications that have to be done on the first surface or exterior of the storefront or the building front, maybe going over existing signage, maybe going on the front glass. So cold weather can be a challenge. Again, fortunately, we do have adhesives that will work at cooler temperatures in the cold. But the other thing is dwell time. At room temperature, it typically takes 6 to 12 hours for a standard adhesive to develop that full bond. And that's because even a smooth surface microscopically has got a bunch of ridges and valleys, as illustrated here. And over time, that adhesive, which we consider a slow moving liquid, will flow and fill those air gaps. And that's when you get full adhesion. That slows down the colder it is. So we either have to make sure that whatever's being done is done at room temperature and allow dwell time, or we have to use a different adhesive to enable that to occur during those colder temperatures. So that's it for my portion, and turn it over to David.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. So I do know that Kelly does have a meeting at 3 o'clock. So I'm just wondering if there are any questions for Kelly before I start my before I start my part of it. And then if not, thank you so much to Kelly. But yeah, are there any questions? You can just chat it, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question. And for Jeff, we'll sort of do the Q&A for Jeff with myself after we're done.
If there are no questions, I just want to thank everyone for webbing in and joining us. And I want to thank David and his team for putting this together. It's my first webcast. It was a very enjoyable experience. Thank you, David.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now then, and then we'll go from there. Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, so in working with Kelly and her team on this particular project, it sort of it made us look at what SignAgent was doing, and I guess the whole COVID-19 the pandemic sort of made us think about, well, what is it that we can do to help out here? And so we went through SignAgent, and some of the things that I had envisioned in the past, we sort of prioritized over other developments. And one of them was scaled location plans. And really part of the exercise is that circulation path that Kelly had outlined. We wanted to have arrows that were sort of 6 feet from centers away from each other along this path, and it was like, well, how do we do that? And in the course of the project itself, we actually eyeballed it, and that was good for the project, but that sort of got me thinking that's really not an acceptable sort of long-term solution, or solution that we can expect all our clients to do. So what we did is we developed a system, and we sort of got our dev team together and said, well, let's fast track this feature. And so what we did, and this is actually now live on the app right now. So when you go to your current projects, if you have to do a project or a COVID project on an existing project or new project, you can come in here and you can see my locations. And if I go to level 1 now and I go to edit it, there's now a spot for scale. And as I could see on this plan itself, it actually does say 1 to 200. So it was perfect. So I just put in 1 to 200 and hit save. And then that got me to the scale of the signs. So what I can see here now is if I select, and there's now a measures tool here, which I can now see the distance between 2 markers. So if I come in here and I'll zoom in to this one and this one here, I can click on it and say, okay, well, what's the distance between these? And if I click that one and then click the next one, I'm sitting at 1 meter or 6 foot 6 inches apart. And then if I go to the next one, it's gonna go always between the last 2 signs that were selected. So I can select this one, and now, yeah, 2 meters, so 6 feet 6 inches, right? So very cool. And we can go through and do all of that, checking. And so if I'm going to add this next sign, I click here, and then I'll go to add a new sign, and I want this to be a floor marker. We've actually got it now that it's actually placing the sign right in the spot where it is, and it's actually showing the preview of the direction that it's facing. And I can hit save, and then it drops that pin in that spot. And now when I click this one and that one, it's saying, well, I'm 7 feet, and then I can now move it back into the spot where I want it to go, and there we go. So pretty cool. And then from there, this is the actual dimension, and this could be the actual symbol of the sign. So we actually have incorporated scaled markers, but also customizable markers. So this marker here, I actually drew in Illustrator, which is not that. It is floor arrow. So that's a sign that was, artwork that was drawn in Illustrator. So then I would have gone File, Export as an SVG, and I can export that one. And then when I come to the application, I can come in here and then I say, manage my visuals. And then I can either batch import or add a new visual. But when I upload it, you'll see that we have a new markers, a sign markers section, and here's all my markers. So then what I can do is say, okay, well, this floor marker, when I right click on it, I can come in here and there's now a new markers tab. And in here, I can say when I'm using a scaled location plan. So on here, I actually say the scale and then I say I want to use that scale. And it has a 24 by 24 inch dimension. So when I come back to here to this location plan, at a this is a small thing that I think we need to improve upon, is to make it sort of go right back to the scale mark or to the scale plan where it was. Jesse, you can make a note of that, and our tech team will fix that up. But this is actually 24 inches in diameter, and if you look at a standard door being 36 inches, it's 24, right? It's 2/3 of that door, so that is pretty sweet. So those are some of the new tools now, and you can actually see here that these are some other signs that I have here that have been uploaded, and the artwork's uploaded. And these are actually also marked as scalable. And what I did for these ones here is I actually just drew some custom scale markers, and in here I just made them at different widths. So if I click on this one, there's a scale marker here. And this is overall, it's 6 inches, 11 inches, 17/24. The great thing about this is you can work you can be flexible in how it works, and you can just use a standard symbol, but still scale that standard symbol. And then later on, once you're getting near the end, you can sort of clean it up to make it a little more together, so that these arrows are not necessarily more bigger than the others. So an example of that is these signs here these are the standard previous symbols that are in as a scale, but they're not using the same marker as this one here. So if I went into the W3, I can edit that and then go to my markers and just say, okay, well, this is 11 width. So I actually, instead of using the standard one side, I can say I want to actually use the one that I drew for 11. And then when I save that, and then go back, you'll see now that, yeah, that marker is the consistent size of that marker. And so the L2s are still the previous ones that are just a marker that's being scaled up independently. So that's sort of the new features, and I think it's pretty awesome. We could actually even draw plexiglass dividers now in this, so you can, if you had different widths of plexiglass, you could be doing the shields for plexiglass around there. And all of this is then exportable as an Excel file, so you can get the sign counts like Kelly was showing. And yeah, and you can work really flexibly, and you can flexible, and you can actually plan out your you know, implementations and different levels of work here. So for instance, I had an existing project here, and then I have these other projects, and these actually I sort of show it as an example, basically saying right now in Canada we're a stage 3, or at least in Southern Ontario where we're at. But we could have had other projects set up for what stage 1 looks like, what stage 2 looks like, and those would look very different. And you can basically plan for stage 4, which is like going back to normal, and that's putting everything back to how it was, kind of thing. So here I can see all my current signs. So if I turn off this project, you can see that these room IDs just disappeared. And now we're focusing on just the signs that are in our COVID project. And again, the approval processes. So these signs here, this was marked as review. I could say, okay, these are ready for my client to review, or even for an internal review, which is what we were doing sort of back and forth. Is when we were planning, we would mark the signs as, we'd mark it for review, and then Yunji would log in, and she would see the signs that were marked for review, and then she would she'd come in and basically see, she could turn off the draft signs, so she didn't have to look at any of those, and then she could just click on that one and say, okay, you know, that looks good. It's on the right door, perfect. I'll go to the next one. Yep, same one there. And then it would pan and zoom to the next sign. Yeah, washing hands guide there. Perfect. And so on. And then we could say, I could reject one, but then the client, or, you know, they could leave a comment saying, you know, this is, and I'm just going to say it's the wrong marker, but which is sort of totally a cosmetic thing, but this is and then reject that. And then what we would see, sort of working back with from them, is we could look at it and say, okay, well, what were all the things that we did wrong, and how can we fix that? And then I could go, oh, you know, this is the wrong, oh, it's the wrong marker. It doesn't represent well. Okay, I'm going to go in here, and that is the wash your hands. And the template itself was a 17. That is a 17, but I'm now going to pick my marker 17 that I drew, save it. And the beauty of this is that it goes on a, there's an insertion point, and that insertion point you draw in Illustrator. So here there's this little insertion point, and it's on an insertion layer. And then what it does is it actually places that on that pin right on that spot. So if there's no insertion pin, then it would pick the center of the box, wherever that is. But this insertion point overrides that. So now when I come back and save that and go to that level, you'll see that that's a much more normal size looking thing. And we can then come back here and say, okay, well, I fixed it. And then I would turn that off. They would turn it on or approve it, and then go from there. And throughout this whole process, again, lots of you know that, you know, all of this is being tracked. 2 minutes ago, I changed it to review, then it was approved. If I find that other one, we can see, you know, it was rejected by the client. This is their comment. Then we fixed it. And so everything's tracked. So we're at 3 o'clock exactly. So why don't we open this up to questions? And I will stop sharing my screen. And if you want to ask the question, by all means, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Why don't we
There's
start
a
with some of the
question for you there,
questions?
Jeff. Sorry, Jesse. Yeah.
Okay,
There's one
why
on
don't
the
we start
chat
with
there
some of the
from
questions
Brenda.
that came in through the chat during Jeff's presentation. So Stephen asked if you do your test with the standard 3M test kit. That was during slide 16 when you were talking about adhesion to powdered metals.
So yes, we would use the adhesion test kit has, I think, 7 different films in there. One of them is the LSE type adhesive. So I typically test with our standard and whatever else I think might, sometimes I put down 5 different films. But if I know it's powder coated, I would put probably the standard just to give me a baseline. And I would also use the LSE and compare those two and see what kind of ratings I get. And, I might get on that scale, I might only get 400 grams when I pull with the standard, but I might get 950 when I pull with the LSE. So that would tell me that I absolutely need the LSE type to bond to that surface, because 900 is a good number.
Great, thanks, Jeff. One more question came in for you specifically, and that's from Brenda. She asked about external signage that's being exposed to direct sunlight. It usually loses their vivid colors after a short while. Have you found any solutions for that?
Yeah, so that's typically going to be a function of the inks that are being used in the printer from the vendor. So there are different types of inks in these various printers. If you're using a printer that's primarily meant to print on paper for interior type applications, those are a dye-based ink, and they definitely break down under UV conditions. And you've probably seen it where the sign is blank after a year. So for exterior grade outdoor applications, you need to be using a printer and ink system that uses pigmented inks. And so that's a good kind of checking question with the vendor to say, hey, what type of printer? I would be, normally the vendors, if they're in the signage and outdoor graphics business, they're pretty much, they might have 2 different types of printers or several different types, but they should have a robust print platform that's running a pigmented ink that will stand up to the UV exposure. But again, there are different grades of inks and pigments, and some last longer than others. One of the things that we've done at 3M is we've worked with the printer manufacturers, and in some cases they followed 3M technical specifications to formulate their inks. And so those inks, even though they're made by HP or EFI Vutech or some other, Mimaki or Muto or Epson, they're actually made to a specification that 3M is able to extend our finished graphic warranty with those inks. So we've worked hand in hand with the printer manufacturers to develop those systems. So that's sort of the value of our match component system approach. And again, it's based on testing in real world environments. So we have test decks around the world where we put it at a 45-degree angle and we wait. We do accelerated lab testing as well, but we also validate with real world weathering. And then we're able to say, okay, if you're running this printer with these inks on this material, that we anticipate that finished graphic will have a durability of 8 years, and it'll have a warranty period of 5. And we're pretty conservative.
Yeah, that weather thing was on one of the other slides that you showed, but we cut it out for time, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Somebody mentioned no shag carpet. That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was me. Okay, well, yeah, thank you to Jeff and thank you to Kelly for this webinar. And yeah, I will let me go back to my slide here then. I got to share my screen quickly. So if you need to get a hold, or if you have any other questions that are that you want answered offline, there are the emails of the presenters and the websites for more information. And then just to let you know that our next webinar, we're planning on doing the artwork 201, and that will be going into more sliding and alignments and using sort of more advanced features. If you haven't been to the Artwork 101, you can get a recording of that as well to get caught up before that. So again, thank you to Jeff and thank you to Kelly and the Envision team. And that is all. You can have a wonderful rest of a Thursday. Thank you.